Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and today I want to talk about two movies about Golda Meir. One of them came out in 1982 and it was made for TV movie. And honestly, I only watched it because Leonard Nimoy was in it. He played Golda's husband. And Golda was played by two different actresses. One was the younger Golda, the other one was the older Golda, who they also put makeup on the more it went into the future. And the newer movie came out this year, and only one actress played Golda. And it was obviously a much more expensive movie. The way everything looked was much better. And yet, I think the older movie was much better, mainly because it didn't just focus on the Yom Kippur War like the new movie. In the old one, it focused on her entire life, and so it's from her childhood up until the peace treaty with Egypt after the war, and so there was a lot more stuff there. And also a lot of personal drama, her relationship with her husband, Spock, the formation of the State of Israel, all the wars up until the Yom Kippur War, and so there was a lot more stuff there. And even the acting, I think, was kind of better by everyone in the old version. In the new one, the woman who played Golda was okay, but all the other ones acting is not that good. And maybe the reason is, they took a lot of actors from Israel to play these roles, and their English is not that good. I guess they wanted them to sound more Israeli, to have Israeli accents, and that's why they did it. But I think because it wasn't their first language, they had to focus too much on just saying things correctly, that their acting abilities kind of diminished. They are all good actors in Israel, by the way, but in this movie I was very disappointed because a lot of it just didn't feel authentic, a lot of it felt like bad acting, and so it felt kind of weird to me. Also, the new movie tries too hard to be artistic. There's a lot of shots that kind of try too much, and especially it focused too much on the smoking. Golda Meir was a chain smoker, but they kind of focus on it so much in this movie, like literally in every scene, and trying to show as if it symbolizes something. So there are scenes of the smoke going up in an artistic way and all kinds of strange things, which visually was done nice in a practical sense, but it doesn't really have any substance to it. Like, it's style over substance, and so I didn't like it. There's a lot of symbolic scenes of birds flying all over the place in the sky. They try to show the psychological burden of her being prime minister during the war and her emotional breakdown, and all of that stuff was technically done well, but first of all, I'm not sure how accurate a lot of the stuff in the movie is. They kind of exaggerate things for the sake of drama, I think. And if it was accurate to reality, then that means she's a terrible leader, because if that's how she behaved during a war, then that's really not a good thing, because, a leader has to have, nerves of steel to be able to make decisions and to use brains and logic and not just emotions. But the way they show it in this new movie, it's kind of too emotional, and I'd be okay with showing it a little bit. Obviously, any person would be emotional, but they kind of exaggerated. They show her having nightmares and hallucinations, and also she's fighting cancer during this movie, so there's a lot to focus on that, and the smoking. I guess half of this movie is like an anti-smoking ad, because they keep showing how much she smokes, and then she's going to have cancer treatments, all while pretending everything is okay as she's facing a huge war and an emotional hardship and all of that. I guess it works on a dramatic level, but I also think this movie didn't really provide enough backstory, especially for people who don't know the history. If you don't know anything and just watch this movie, it will seem kind of weird. Why is this old lady giving orders to generals and all of that while just seeming like a normal old lady? So that might be a little bit strange for people who don't know the actual history. While the older movie, The Woman Called Golda, did a much better job of showing the entire story and how it got to that point, and also showing why she's a strong female leader. That's something I often complain about in my videos about modern Hollywood movies, how much they love to show this idea that a woman can be a strong leader, but they often show it in a badly written way, which seems unrealistic. And yet this old movie, which is based on a true story, is showing that in a good way, in a believable way. They show all the drama stuff, that she is kind of neglecting her own children because she's so busy at work and all of that. So it shows all sides of it. It shows the complexity in the personal life of such a woman. And so this is something this old movie did well. Maybe because it's based on a true story, so it was easy to write. You didn't have to invent it. You just had to base it on real stories. And in the new movie Golda, the problem is because they focus so heavily on the drama aspect of showing, how hard it is emotionally. I think because of it, it gave the impression that she's actually not a good leader, that she's a kind of a emotional wreck and physically weak and all of that. So would you really want to have such a leader? And that, I think, does kind of a disservice to her real character. And another thing I really liked in the old movie were a lot of scenes in which shows how modest she is. You know, even though she's a prime minister, she takes guests in her private home and makes coffee and a cake for them personally and shows her like a regular sweet old lady. And suddenly she starts talking about military tactics and what kinds of weapons they need and what tanks, what airplanes, and she knows everything about the military. So that movie did a good job of showing both her human side and why she's a good leader. And in the new movie they tried to do, there were a few scenes like that, and there was a funny scene that had kind of a cameo of Ariel Sharon when he was a general, and it was a little bit on the nose when there's a scene that she literally tells him you'll be prime minister one day and stuff like that. And I did like the part when no one was looking and then he stole half the cake to himself to eat. It's funny because he used to be fat later on. And most of the actors did not really look like the real people they're playing, and that's kind of a problem in a few places in the movie, especially when they cut to real life footage and they look nothing like the actors playing them. So that was a little bit jarring, like it takes you out of the movie. There was one scene in which they put the actress who plays Golda on top of real footage when Golda was visiting soldiers on the front, and they did like a Forrest Gump effect. And it was done pretty well, like if you didn't know it, you wouldn't even notice it. But that was the only example in the whole movie in which they did that. And also, even though the whole movie is about the war, they barely showed anything from the war. They showed a few snippets of it, either from a helicopter or from some night vision airplane footage or stuff like that. And so it didn't really feel that impressive as a war movie. They barely showed anything. And they exaggerated a lot of things for the sake of drama, and you know, the personal feelings of Golda while she's going through all of it was, I guess, good drama. But if that was the actual leader during a war, then that's terrible. You wouldn't want your leader to kind of lose it and be an emotional wreck while having to make decisions. Also, they imply as if she made decisions based on emotions and not the best thing in the big picture, like she has a secretary or something whose son is at the front and he got stuck somewhere, and so she wants to rescue that platoon because the son of her friend is there and not because it's the strategically correct thing. And so that annoyed me, again, if that was the actual case, and I didn't look it up to see how accurate it is to reality. And also the movie was trying to be ambiguous. They didn't say that's why she made that decision, but they kind of imply that she's making decisions based on emotions because of some personal relationships she has, because she knows people whose sons are there, and so she's making decisions not based on what is best for in the big picture. And so that's something that annoyed me. And so because of stuff like that, and because of so much focus on the emotional side of things, you barely even see why is she a good leader. Like, why would anyone want to take orders from her? What's so special about her? Why is she supposed to be so clever and all of that? So there was barely any of that part in the movie, except maybe one scene when she was talking with Kissinger on the phone, who also doesn't look like the real one, who they also showed in the footage from the real one, and then cut to this one, and so they look nothing alike. So anyway, there was one scene when she's in a phone call with him, and then she starts telling him about the pogroms that Russians made against Jews when she was a little child, and then said, I'm not that little girl anymore, and she's threatening to destroy the Egyptian army. That was the only scene that felt like she's a powerful political figure. The rest of the movie, she seems like an old lady who's an emotional wreck. And so that's my main issue with this version of it. I think the older one showed much better both the dramatic parts, the emotional parts, but also showed more of why she was a strong leader. And that was mostly missing from the new version. And the last thing I want to say is how creepy it was for me personally that I watched this movie, the new version, just a few days before recent events in my country. And I remember thinking how good it is that nothing like that can ever happen again. And you know, the Yom Kippur War started by surprise on the holiest day, on Yom Kippur, on the 6th of October. And just a few days after watching this movie, on the 7th of October, we experienced something really similar. And so a few days after that, I just had to watch the movie again with this new perspective, and it did make me feel differently. It did make me much more emotional watching this movie after what just happened. And there are so many parallels in this movie compared to what's happening today that it's kind of creepy. It's kind of, some people will say it's a conspiracy, it's predictive programming or whatever, that what a coincidence. And I don't think it is. I think it's simply the old saying, history repeats itself, is strangely correct. And maybe Hamas did it deliberately to be kind of symbolic because, you know, exactly 50 years passed after the Yom Kippur War, and now they attack us once again on a Saturday morning during a holiday and catching Israel by surprise. And once again, the leadership seems kind of incompetent. There's a lot of parallels, and so that made it more interesting and more emotional for me to watch it, especially the final scene that shows kind of a bunch of dead birds on the floor, kind of symbolizing all the victims of the war. And you know, earlier in the movie there were shots of the birds flying away, and so there's a lot of kind of symbolic shots and symbolic images in the movie. You know, the parts when she's going to a treatment in the hospital in secret and she goes through a morgue, and the first time she goes through there are barely any bodies there, and later on during the war you can see there's a bunch of bodies in the morgue. And so there's a lot of symbolic scenes like that, and the final shot of the movie shows a bunch of dead birds on the floor that looks like a battlefield, and so that did make me emotional. And I would probably not have made this review if not for the recent events, which kind of made all of that stuff more relevant nowadays, because otherwise I would say, oh, it's ancient history, it's not that important, but now it seems much more important to know the history. So I do recommend especially the older one, A Woman Called Golda, because it shows kind of a bigger picture, it shows the full story. And the new movie Golda just shows the Yom Kippur events, but it's so relevant today because there are so many similarities that I do think it's interesting to watch. So that's all for today, and I'll see you all next time. Bye bye.